Okay, guys, welcome. How are you guys? Good. So here I'm. Hey, Pouncy. Pouncy? You're fine. So I wanted to talk to you about the experience of my life when it comes to culture and language proficiency, okay? So, but first I wanted to talk a little bit about numbers of what happens around the world, correct? This is a projection of how many people will be in the world by 2100, right? Right now we're standing somewhere here between 7.3 billion and 7.5, and by 2100 there will be 11.2 billion people in the world, right? That's the projection according to the United Nations. Then, out of all that people, there's a lot of languages, right? The most spoken language in the world is, no surprise, Chinese, because there are plenty of them, and then Spanish, right? So, Spanish is my, and these are mother languages, right? So basically, I speak Spanish. There's a lot of us too. No surprise there, because the Spanish colonized pretty much all of the Americas and some parts of Asia. And then English, right? Similar case. Now, what does that mean for you guys? It means you have a billion opportunities, okay? So, let's say you come up with the next Coca-Cola or with the next iPod, right? You have a startup company and you develop that product that everybody wants in the world. Those 11 billion people are your customers, okay? And in order for you to get to your customers, you have to know them. You have to know how they speak. You have to know how they interact with each other. Okay, so that's why when it comes in handy to speak at least another language and to get to know the culture of those different countries. Now, I am just a kid from Mexico. Okay, I'm just a guy who dreamed of escaping his city. Okay, I grew up in Mexico City. I was born and raised there. I'm the second of 7, okay? And most of all of my siblings are women, so I'm very in touch with my feminine side. Okay, and I'm the second oldest. I was born and raised in Mexico City, and I always dream of escaping it. Why? It's not because it's an ugly city. It's not because I didn't like it. It's because I thought there was something else out there that I felt attracted to, okay? This is a little fact for you to realize how lucky I am. In Mexico, when you finish, out of 10 students that finish high school, only 3 get to go to college. And of those 3, only 1 finishes. So I'm one of those, okay? I got to finish college. And not only that, think about it, hold on. Thank you so much. We're not done, but we're good. Okay, so think about it this way. Mexico is a country where college is practically free. I mean, I didn't go to a public institution. I went to a private university, but there's public schools in Mexico that cost less than a Coke, okay? For you to pay tuition in those schools, it's less than a Coca-Cola, okay? So it's relatively free, and this is how little of the people of my countrymen finish college, okay? Now, where have I worked for? This is, I would say, my first love, the Coca-Cola company. I wanted to work for the Coca-Cola company when I was in high school. Okay, so that's a dream come true for me. And I remember when I was in college, there was a fair of companies that were looking for trainees and things like that, right? And me and my best friend, we print our resumes, and we only print 3. Okay, each print 3 resumes, and we say, we're only going to give these to the companies we want to work for. And one of those was the Coca-Cola company, and they were lucky enough to hire me, right? After they hired me when I was in college, then they offered me a permanent position, and they sent me to travel the world, at least, well, Latin America. It's part of the world. So I lived in several countries in Latin America because of that job, but we'll talk about it later. Then I became a consultant for a while. This is Softec. This is Mexican consulting company, very entertaining. I worked there during the soft-tech years. I worked for GE, implementing software there. And that was an interesting experience because it was in a different city within Mexico, and it was a very different culture, even within the same country, right? But we'll talk about it a little bit more. Then Hershey, the Hershey company, because I like sugar apparently, came talking to me, and they offered me a job, okay? And so I went to work for Hershey in Mexico and in the US, and I got to know how is life in rural Pennsylvania, right? Because that's basically where Hershey is, right? So if you go to Hershey, you're talking about a tiny, tiny town in the middle of Pennsylvania that houses this humongous company. Now, where have I lived? As I say, I grew up in Mexico City. It's a beautiful city. If you get a chance to go, you should. Food is amazing. Culture is great. It's an amazing city to visit. Then I moved with my parents to Querétaro, which is a city northern of Mexico. Again, most cities in Mexico are full with different culture, different types of food. That's very enjoyable. Then I started traveling through the world. This is San Jose. Can you put it on a map? Yes, this is Central America, Costa Rica. This is, excuse me? Pura vida, mae. Exactly. So, what happens here is Costa Rica, it's a beautiful country. It's really green. If you're outdoorsy, this is the country for you, okay? Then I moved to a different place, Buenos Aires in Argentina. This was a cultural experience. Buenos Aires is an amazing city, okay? Oh, I forgot to say. Every time I moved to a different country, I had 3 things in my to-do list before getting there. No. I had 1 thing in my to-do list before getting there, and 2 as soon as I arrived. Before getting there, I read the history of the country because I wanted to know where they were coming from. Okay? I wanted to understand what made them how they are, right? So that's history. That's what history will give you. The second thing that I would do is, as soon as I arrived to wherever I was going to stay, I just left my luggage and get out and walk for an hour and a half. Just walk for an hour and a half. And then stop and try to find my way back. That's a very interesting experience because you have to start asking for directions, you have to start interacting with people, and you have to start to know your surroundings, the place where you're going to live, interact with that people. And the third thing that I did was take public transportation to the office. Okay? And that also meant interacting with people, trying to understand the rationale on the public transportation. If you've taken public transportation in a different country, you will find it really hard. It's not that easy because it's built for the mindset of the people who live there. So that'll give you that different perspective on the people where they live. Now, in Buenos Aires, I had a lot of funny things happening to me. So for instance, pastries. You will assume that the word for pastry in Latin America is the same. You would assume wrong, right? So the thing is, the name for pastries here in Argentina is factura. And a factura in the rest of Latin America, it's a bill. So whenever they ask me, oh, do you want a factura? I was like, no, I'm fine. I don't want more bills, I'm fine. So, but yeah, that's one of the things that can happen when you start traveling around places that have the same language, but the culture is different, and the different backgrounds of the people that came to live in that place is different. So Argentina is crowded with Italians. So they are loud, and they like their pizzas and their pastas and the meat and whatnot. But that's when you see the Italian part of it. Oh, what happened here? There you go. Then I moved to a different city, Santiago, Chile. Ah, chilenos por allá. Muy bien. Welcome. So I live in Santiago for a year, and this is also a different experience. Why? Because Chile lived through a dictatorship. Okay, so from the late 70s to, I think, early 90s, there was a dictator called Augusto Pinochet who did a lot of horrible things, and try to set the country in the path of capitalism. So you can see the differences between Argentina and Chile are very clear. But one of the things that really strike me, for instance, comparing Santiago and Buenos Aires, was that the people in Buenos Aires go out until 4 or 5 in the morning. And I kid you not. I'm not even saying the youngster like you. I'm talking about, I went out to have ice cream at 1 a.m. because, you know, it's 1 a.m., you want ice cream, you go for ice cream. And there was a couple with their baby in a stroller waiting in line for ice cream. And it was like, yeah, it seems like, and that was very normal in Buenos Aires. I'm not saying it's healthy. All I'm saying is that that's what they do. And in Santiago, they were so used to the dictatorship that everything was closed at 1 a.m. And they had already expanded the time that business could be open, right? So that's a cultural thing, and that's affected by the history. And if you're gonna live there, if you wanna be successful there, you have to understand those little details and that minutia. Okay? Where else have I lived? Guadalajara. This is a beautiful city in Mexico. And I moved there after I got married to my beautiful wife over there. You can raise your hand, please. There you go. No, she's right in front, you guys. Come on. Okay, so we got married and we moved to Guadalajara. And the thing about Guadalajara is that it's very similar, to be fair, to Atlanta. When it comes to size, when it comes to number of people living there, the thing is that it has tequila in there, which might be better, might help. But this is also it's a very interesting city when it comes to culture in Mexico, because this is a very proud city. Because a lot of the things that you relate to Mexico are from there. As I said, tequila is from there. Mariachi is from there. Some of the food like birria is from there, that kind of stuff. So a lot of the things that people recognize about Mexico outside of Mexico are from there, and they're very proud of it. Then, yes, Hershey, PA. It was lovely. It was a lovely place. It's tiny, and I like it because it's really, really close to New York, and you can go to Washington, D.C. Well, to be fair, people at Hershey are great, but you can see how limited their cultural experience has been, right? So I work here with people that had lived all their lives, that grew up in Hershey, PA, that went to Penn State, which is like 2 hours away, maybe a little less, and that came back and got a job at Hershey and had never left the country. Okay, so for them, going to work with us was a bit of a challenge. Not only because of the language, but because they couldn't understand some of the things that people in Mexico did. Okay, and that's part of what I think, that's why you have to learn that cultural part of everywhere you go to. Okay, and last but not least, we moved to Atlanta. The Coca-Cola company called me back, and I said, yes, why not? I'm back. So these are the places that I visited since 2012, which is when Google started tracking me. And it come in handy, right? Now it comes handy. But as you can see, I've been to Japan. Well, you cannot see it, it's over there. I've been to Japan, some places in Europe. I keep on trying through Latin America. And I want to tell you a story about my visit to Japan. I went there for business, right? I had to attend some meetings with the people at the R&D center in Tokyo. And one of my uncles happened to have lived in Japan for 12 years. So I gave my uncle a call. Why? Because I wanted to know how people in Japan interacted on a business scenario. And he gave me all the proper tips for me to interact with them. And like I said, that part of why that visit was a success was because of the things that he told me, right? He went through details like, if they're giving you their business card, you pick it with both hands, and you don't put it in the pocket of your pants. You put it in front of you on the table, because you want to know who they are, and they want to be known, right? You don't stand like that, because they think you're ignoring them. And actually, when you think about it, yeah, it's looks kind of bad. And that kind of stuff. All those things that my uncle told me came in very handy for me for that, in that presentation. Now, why don't I live in my home country? Okay, I'm going to tell you a story about when I was 10. I came to the US with my family. That's 4 of my sisters, Pinocchio and me. We came to the US, we came to Disneyland, to California. And I remember vividly that when I came here, I said, there's something about this country that I really like. I really didn't know what it was back then, but I realized I like it, okay? Then when I was 12, so a couple of years passed, I went to New York City. And I learned about immigration to the US, and I learned about the Statue of Liberty, and I learned about what happened in Ellis Island, and I realized that what I like about the States was that ethos of freedom. That's what I like, and that's that I realized that I didn't have that fully in my country. Now, all these things have actually a root, right? All that, how come you 10-year-old dude can have all those, or 12-year-old realize about freedom and whatnot? Well, it was my family, right? And I'm going to tell you about my grandparents first, because that's the root of this thing. Okay, so these are my grandparents from my dad's side. He was a bad man, right? He died alone because he decided to live alone. She is, I would say, a great woman. She had 4 kids by the time she was 29 and no husband. Okay, so she worked her way out of poverty, and she helped my dad become a lawyer, and that was a beautiful thing, I think. Then you have the other side of the equation, is my mom's side. These guys were more, he was a CPA, they were very smart. I think they were a great couple. They were a classical Mexican family, 12 kids. Sounds very, very classical Mexican. One of those 12 kids was my mom. And the story here is my grandfather was a very successful businessman when he worked for Mexican companies. When he wanted to advance his career and go to work for an American company, he couldn't. Why? Because he didn't speak English. Okay? So what happened then? He decided that he didn't want any of his kids to have that limitation. So he basically enrolled all of my uncles and aunts in English classes, and all of them speak at least 2 languages. Okay? And that rolled over to my family. So that's why I speak English. Now, from that weird combination, my parents got married. So my mom was more of a liberal, middle-class Mexican woman. Yeah, that exists. My dad was trying to find my way out of poverty, Mexican man that went to law school. And the story about my dad going to law school is also very funny, because he wanted to be an engineer, just like I am. But he couldn't afford the school where he wanted to go. So he decided to, well, law school is cheaper. That's how it is in Mexico. Law school is cheaper, so in the meantime, while I save money to go to my engineering school, I'll go to law school. And life happens, and he ended up being a lawyer, right? Why is that relevant? Because at some point, you're going to have to do sacrifices, okay, for your family. Now, these 2 different stories that are my grandparents that blended into my parents are 2 different stories with the same goal. Does anybody know what this picture is? What? Yes, it's from the French Revolution. But what do you know how is it called? It's Lady Liberty leading the people. Okay? Why is that relevant? Because the story of my 2 families is a story of people that wanted their kids to be free. Think about it. They wanted me to be free to do whatever I wanted with my life. In order for you to be free, you have to know your choices. you have to be aware of what you have available at your disposal. Okay? So what they gave me was a tool set for my life. This was life in my family. It's some people find it weird because they say, oh, Mexican, oh yeah, rancheras. No. Okay, so my family was, you have to study, you have to at least have a degree, a bachelor degree, and you're think about it. We're 7, and 6 of those are women. In Mexico, typical macho culture and things like that. No, my dad wanted every one of his daughters to have a degree, a college degree. And of my sisters, all have a college degree, and 2 of them have doctorate, master's degrees. 1 went to med school, so they're doing really great, right? So it was education, a second language, and music, culture. Okay, that was the way of my parents to show me what was available that was relatively cheap, right? And that and the whole traveling thing, that kind of helped. But yeah, I'm here to tell you that I am a very privileged man, right? But I realized my privilege, and I'm grateful for it because I understand who gave that privilege to me, okay? So, I want you to come out of this talk with a brief message. So it's basically, man's great privilege is to be able to love and to transcend what is fleeting and ephemeral. So what you want to do in this life is to transcend, English. You want to transcend, okay? You want to leave something for someone else, right? So in my case, my grandparents and my parents transcended in that way. So if you think about it this way, because I'm pretty sure that you're thinking, man, this guy had a life. He was 15 and had already been to New York, Los Angeles, and I don't want to sound too immodest, but I've been to Rome when I was 15 and to Madrid. I've been to Europe when I was 15. Think about it that way. That sounds like, wow, that guy's very privileged. Yeah, I am. But I wanted to understand that I got that opportunity because my parents wanted me to see the world from a different perspective. Okay? So my parents transcended. So when you think about it that way and you say, well, I didn't have the opportunities you have, that's true. But don't think about it from my perspective, but from my grandparents' perspectives. You can make a difference in the life of those that will come after you. So if you think that you're not where I am at, you might be at where my grandparents or my parents were, right? So you have the option of giving this privilege to your kids, okay? And yay, that's me. And that's all I have, guys. Hold on, let me do some brand awareness.
Perfect timing. Thank you so much, Ricardo. I think we have a little bit of time for some questions. So does anybody have any questions for our speaker? And I can hand you the microphone. Who would like to ask a question in the public forum? Yes. There we go.
What did you major in when you went to college?
Excuse me?
What did you major in when you went to college?
I'm a computer engineer.
What did you major in? What was your major in college?
Computer engineer.
Perfect. All right. Anybody else?
No? No one else?
Okay. Ricardo, maybe I have a question for you.
Oh my God, no. There's a question over there.
Oh, wonderful. All right.
Yes, wonderful.
What was your favorite place to be?
What was
Out of all the places that you've traveled to, what was your favorite?
Okay, so I will tell you this. I think it depends on what you're looking for. And I lived there in several different, times of my life. So I would say if you want to have a cultural experience and have a good time at the same time, Buenos Aires will be a good place. If you want to have a more of a chaotic experience and visit a place that's so surreal that even Dali said that couldn't be there because he couldn't stand a more surreal place than he was. Was that too complicated? That's Mexico City for you. That's a surreal place. I don't know. I think every city where I lived had a thing, and so I couldn't call a favorite. Even Hershey, that was small and was kind of hard for me and my wife especially, I think had its charm. And I think what I'm trying to say is that the place where you're at right now has its charm. All you have to do is find it. Okay?
It's a great question. Yes.
Out of all the cities and countries you've been to, which one was the most culturally diverse?
Oh, the most culturally diverse. Okay, I would say that's a close tie between Mexico and, don't be surprised, the US. Because of the size of the country and the differences of cultures that have come into the US and the difference of cultures that have come into Mexico. And the difference is, I see, you know what, how they talk about the US being how they call it? Melting pot? I consider it mostly a tossed salad, right? More than a melting pot, I think it's a tossed salad. So it's all tossed together, but not really mixing. So that's one thing. And the other one is Mexico is actually a melting pot. So you have marriages between Indians and Spaniards, and there's part of the country where a battalion from the US got lost. Well, they didn't get lost. They probably fell in love with the country. It was an Irish battalion. So you go in Mexico and all of a sudden you see a redhead walking down there and you go like, what the heck? And you talk to him in English and he was like, no, ¿qué te pasa, tipo? No, so Mexico in that regard is both countries are very rich culturally.
Right. We have another question over here.
Okay. If you couldn't become an engineer, what job or career would you have?
If
you couldn't become like an engineer, what job or career would you have chosen?
I would have been a lawyer. You know, I would have followed the steps of my dad.
That's a scary thought.
Okay. What would you consider to be your passion, and how did you go about finding it?
So my passion is writing. I love to write. I would love to tell stories, but it's a little bit weird because it's kind of like what might happen to my dad. I would have loved to have been a writer for a living, but I thought, well, maybe I don't think I can afford to a good life in Mexico being a writer. But it might have been just a problem on my part. But the second part of your question was, well, how do I go about finding?
How did you find your passion?
How do you find it?
Mm-hmm.
I specifically, well, I don't know. I just like to tell stories. It seems to me that there's nothing more, in my opinion. When you tell a story that's a good story and you make people laugh or you make them cry or you convey an emotion, it's transcending yourself, and that's what I think about it.
Okay, so I saw how many children your grandparents and your parents had.
Yes.
So I was just wondering, how many children did you have?
And here comes the irony. I have 0 kids. Hold on. It's not for lack of trying. Okay. So, here's the thing. Shh. My wife and I cannot have kids. It's very sad, but we're working on adopting our first kid. Yeah. Come on, show me love. I think there's a question over there.
Yep. Oh, no.
Out of all the steps that you've taken, what is the most challenging part?
What is the what?
Most challenging part.
Of what?
Like the decisions that you've made. The decisions that you've made.
On the decisions that I've made, what's the most challenging part? Okay, I'm gonna be honest with you. I think the most challenging part was telling my mom that I was gonna move out of her house. It's a very Latino thing, right? I mean, we live in our parents' house until we get married. So I remember when I started working for Coke, I was making enough money to move out of my parents' house. So I went and tell my mom, hey mom, you know what, I'm making enough money to leave. So I was thinking of maybe, renting an apartment and go live on my own. And my mom got so upset. She told me, if you're gonna leave, you're gonna leave tonight, okay? Don't come and tell me anything, you're leaving tonight. Like, whoa, Jesus. So yeah, so that was kind of scary.
Ricardo, we had one question here.
Yes, sorry.
On a scale from 1 to 10, how important do you think it is to be interculturally competent?
From 1 to 10?
Yes.
10, it's very important.
How so? Why?
How so? Well, think about it this way. If you do not understand, I'm going to give you an example of Argentina. Okay, people in Argentina are very foul-mouthed, have a very foul mouth, like really, really bad. When I did my hour-and-a-half walk around Buenos Aires, people called me a son of a at least 4 times, right? And that was just of interacting with them, right? It was very weird. But what happened then? So that means that you have to grow, in that case, I had to grow a thick skin to work with them. Because I knew that they were gonna have that foul mouth that's not very, I mean, Mexicans, we tend to be very, like decent, and we don't, we're kind of shy, it's kind of weird. But yeah, you have to grow a thick skin because they're gonna be aggressive towards you, and you have to know that. You have to know when people are gonna be aggressive. You have to know that, for instance, the Japanese people, at least the people living in Japan, they're not, once you're done with your meeting, you ask them, hey, do you have a question? And they go like, no questions. And a week after that, I receive an email from the top level executive that was in that meeting saying, okay, we got together, we talked, and these are our questions. You have to be prepared for that kind of stuff. So I was prepared for, I know that Japan, I'm gonna ask them if they have questions, they're not gonna. So if you want to interact with people in the proper way, you have to be culturally aware.
Thank you. We have time for 2 more questions. Already picked the folks, so here we go.
What motivates you to do what you do today?
What?
What motivates you to do what you do today?
I'm a nerd. I do data science. I do data analytics at Coke. So I basically work with numbers. I work with a computer. I have a couple of data analysts that work for me. And I like that. I'm passionate about that.
Right.
So, how tough was getting your first job? And do you Fortnite?
First, I don't Fortnite. I'm sorry. I would love to, but I don't. How tough was it? It wasn't very tough. People offered it to me. I mean, yeah, my very, very first job, I was just starting college. I think I left that outside, and my teacher of programming, computer programming, at the end of the first semester came over and asked me, hey, would you like to be my assistant? And I was like, sure, why not? Are you paying me? Yes. Oh, perfect. I'm okay.
Which tells you it's all about your connections you make. It's all about how you approach people, the networks you build, and you got to start early with that, right? But you have to know how to approach people right for them to like you, for them to embrace you, and then things are going to be much easier. So, unfortunately, our time's up. Please, big round of applause for Ricardo.
Thank you, guys.